Isaiah Trent woke in his dark bedroom to a voice drifting through the wall. Nyla, talking to someone in the next room. Her tone was soft, confiding the kind of warmth she had not carried in 2 years. Not since cancer took her mother and silence moved into their cabin like a season that refused to leave. Isaiah sat up slowly. Through the gap beneath the door, kitchen light spilled golden across the hallway floor. The smell of coffee reached him. Cinnamon, too. And then his daughter's voice again, whispering words he could not quite hear, but someone was listening. Isaiah stepped into the hallway and stopped before he reached the kitchen. A woman stood at a stove. She wore his old flannel shirt, the green and black one, with the frayed cuff sleeves rolled to her elbows, steam rising from a cast-iron skillet in front of her. Her blonde hair was loosely tied back with a rubber band he recognized from the kitchen drawer. She moved with quiet confidence, flipping something in the pan with a wooden spatula while the coffee maker gurgled behind her. And there, at the kitchen table beside her, sat Nyla barefoot, still in her pajamas with the faded constellation print, her head resting gently against the woman's arm, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The voice he had heard, through the wall, the warmth he had not recognized. This was where it had been coming from. Isaiah did not move. He knew that shirt. It had been folded in the laundry basket beside the dryer since last night's storm. It was the one he had not worn since the first freeze of winter, because it still carried a faint trace of his wife's perfume along the collar, and wearing it felt like opening a wound he had spent 2 years learning to walk beside. The woman turned slowly. Gray eyes met his across the small kitchen, calm, tired. She gave a small smile that looked almost apologetic, as if she understood she had crossed a line she could not name. "Good morning," she said quietly. Isaiah blinked once. He looked at the skillet, then at the coffee, then at Nyla leaning against this stranger's arm, then back at the woman's face. "You're awake," he said. It was not what he meant to say. What he meant was something closer to how, and why, and what is happening inside my kitchen. But the words tangled somewhere between his chest and his throat, and that was all that came out. He remembered the night before in fragments. Freezing rain on County Road 16, headlights catching the shape of a disabled SUV tilted into the ditch near the old timber bridge. A woman standing beside it soaked through her coat, shaking so hard her teeth clicked audibly when he pulled over. He had not asked questions. He simply opened the passenger door and said, "Get in before the cold takes you somewhere you don't come back from." That was who Isaiah Trent was. The kind of man who carried strangers through snowstorms because dignity was not something you calculated, it was something you lived. He had brought her to the cabin, given her blankets, pointed her toward the guest room, and gone to bed without asking her name. No expectations, no agenda, just grace. But this morning the flannel, the coffee, the cinnamon, his daughter pressed against a stranger's side was something else entirely. Isaiah watched Nyla. His daughter had not allowed physical contact with anyone since her mother died. Not teachers, not her grandmother, not even him most days. She flinched when people reached for her. She slept curled into herself like a question mark, arms tucked tight, protecting something invisible. Yet here she sat, leaning into this woman's warmth, as if she had known her for years. The sight moved through Isaiah like a current. The woman lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry about the shirt," she said softly. "Mine got soaked through and your daughter insisted I take it." She glanced at Nyla with a tenderness that seemed involuntary. She was very persuasive. Nyla opened one eye. Isaiah almost smiled. Almost. He looked at the skillet, at the golden pancakes stacked on a plate, at the 2 mugs already poured on the counter. For the first time in 2 years, his cabin did not feel like a place where grief lived. It felt like a place where someone was breathing again. The woman set the spatula down and turned fully toward Isaiah. "She couldn't sleep last night," she said carefully. "The storm scared her." Isaiah leaned against the doorframe, his arms folded across his chest, in the way they always did when something important was coming. "She came to you?" The woman, he still did not know her name, nodded slowly. "I was in the hallway. I couldn't sleep either. The wind was rattling the shutters, and I didn't want to be alone with it." She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "She found me sitting on the floor outside the guest room around 2 in the morning. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat down beside me and pulled her blanket over both of us. Isaiah looked toward Nyla. The little girl had her eyes closed again, her breathing soft and even against the woman's arm. "She doesn't talk to strangers," Isaiah said quietly. "She barely talks to me most days." The woman's expression shifted. Something careful crossed her face, as though she were deciding how much to share and how much to protect. "She talked to me," she said. "She asked if mothers still watch from heaven when their children forget how to smile." The kitchen became very still. Even the coffee maker stopped humming. Isaiah set his mug down slowly. The woman continued, her voice lower now, as if she were trying to return the words as gently as she had received them. Then she whispered something she said was her mother's secret. Something she had never told you. She said she'd been keeping it because she wasn't sure you were ready. Isaiah's chest tightened. He looked at his daughter, this small, quiet girl who had carried a secret like a stone in her pocket for 2 years. What did she say? The woman hesitated. 1 second. 2. She looked at Nyla, who had gone completely still, not asleep, just listening, the way children do when they know something important is being said about them. She said her mom used to promise that if Nyla ever smiled like this again, Daddy wasn't supposed to be afraid of loving someone new. The words landed in the kitchen like stones dropped into still water. Isaiah did not move. He stood with one hand around his coffee mug and the other resting flat against the counter, and he felt something inside him crack, not break, not shatter, but crack, the way ice cracks along a frozen river when the sun finally reaches it in March. He had not heard his wife's voice in 2 years, but he heard it now, carried through the mouth of his 7-year-old daughter, delivered by a stranger in his flannel shirt. At 7:15 on a winter morning, he poured more coffee because his hands needed something to do. His hands were steady, his chest was not. Nyla slid from her chair and walked to the counter. She held up a drawing she had made during the night, 3 figures standing beneath a tall pine tree. 2 were colored in with careful strokes. 1 had no face. Isaiah stared at it. He knew this picture. He had found versions of it tucked beneath Nyla's pillow, folded inside her school bag, pressed between the pages of the book she kept on her nightstand. Always 3 figures. Always one without features. He had never asked her about it because the answer frightened him more than the question. He had tucked each version away in his nightstand drawer, unable to throw them out, unable to look at them twice. He sat down slowly. "She never showed me that one." The woman gave a small smile filled with sadness. Maybe she was waiting for someone to show it to. Nyla pulled on her boots and ran outside to feed Scout, their old golden retriever, who waited beside the back door every morning regardless of weather. The moment she disappeared, the cabin settled into a different kind of quiet, the kind that exists between 2 adults who have not yet decided what to say to each other. Isaiah stood near the window. The woman remained by the stove. Outside, fresh snow covered the fence posts, the woodpile, and the gravel path leading down toward the road. The world looked clean and still, as if last night's storm had erased everything and left only white. Then the back door slammed open. Nyla burst inside with snow on her boots, and her face flushed with cold. "Daddy," she said breathlessly. "There's a black car down by the road." Isaiah moved to the front window, far beyond the fence line, half hidden between snow-covered pines. A dark SUV sat motionless near the old wooden gate at the bottom of the property. Engine off. Dark windows. Snow was already gathering along the roof and hood. It had not been there 5 minutes ago. He turned back toward the kitchen. The woman had gone completely still. The color had quietly left her face. She did not move toward the window. She did not ask, what kind of car. She simply stood beside the stove, with both hands wrapped around her coffee mug, as if warmth alone could keep something from arriving. Isaiah noticed it immediately. The frozen shoulders, the careful breathing, the quiet kind of fear that did not shout. Before he could speak, another vehicle appeared on the ridge road, a mud-spattered Dodge pickup, rust eating through the wheel wells, moving slowly past the SUV, and then slowing even further as it approached Isaiah's property line. Dale Renfro. Isaiah recognized the truck, the way you recognize a sound you have heard too many times. Dale had lived on the ridge for 30 years. He was the kind of neighbor who waved when you matched his expectations and watched carefully when you did not. He had never introduced himself to Isaiah when Isaiah first moved in, never brought a casserole, never offered to help when Isaiah's wife was sick. The truck lingered, then finally moved on. 10 minutes later, Isaiah's phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up. "Mr. Trent, Sheriff Dawson. Just checking in. Got a call about some unusual activity up at your place. Everything all right?" Isaiah closed his eyes for 1 second. He had lived on this ridge for 8 years, paid his taxes, cleared his driveway after every storm, brought firewood to the Hendersons 2 winters ago when their furnace failed. Dale Renfro had never once called the sheriff about the White families on the ridge, not when the Mulligans hosted 40 people for the 4th of July with music past midnight, not when the Breck boys shot rifles behind their barn, until 2 in the morning. But a black man with a strange car near his gate warranted a phone call before 9 on a Sunday. "Everything is fine, Sheriff," Isaiah said, his voice calm and practiced, carrying the particular patience of a man who had learned long ago that composure was not a choice but a survival skill. "Just a guest, waiting out the storm." He set the phone down without explanation. He did not owe one. The woman watched his face. She did not ask what happened. Something in the way he placed the phone on the counter, controlled, deliberate, a gesture worn smooth by repetition, told her this was not the first time, and it would not be the last. She lowered her voice. "You know who's in the black car." Isaiah looked at her steadily. "Do you?" She lowered her eyes. "Possibly." The silence that followed carried weight. Isaiah poured a second cup of coffee and set it on the table without sitting down. The woman stood near the window now, her reflection ghosting across the glass, watching the dark SUV through the frost. She seemed to be making a decision not whether to speak, but how much truth she could afford. When she finally turned from the window, her voice was quiet and measured. "My name is Elise," she said. "Elise Harrington." Isaiah said nothing. She continued anyway. "Harrington Group, Harrington Living, Harrington Hospitality." Each name landed with the precision of someone who had said them in boardrooms and press conferences for over a decade. She did not say them with pride. She said them the way a person recites an address they have lived at too long. Isaiah studied her face. The woman in his kitchen wearing his flannel shirt, standing beside his wood stove, looked nothing like the name she had just given. She looked tired, human, almost small. "Harrington," he repeated quietly. Elise nodded. "The company that remodeled the children's wing at Pine Ridge Hospital." Isaiah went still. Something behind his eyes shifted a recognition that traveled deeper than names or companies. His wife had spent her last 4 months at Pine Ridge, room 312, 3rd floor, East Wing, the one with windows facing the mountains where fog gathered every morning like a congregation. There had been a music room on that floor, small, painted in soft blues and greens, filled with a collection of instruments donated by the Harrington Foundation. A speaker in the corner played lullabies on a quiet loop all day and into the evening. Nyla used to sit there with her mother during the final weeks, the two of them listening to the same 4 songs over and over, while rain hit the windows and the world outside continued without them. It was the only room in the entire hospital where his daughter still smiled. Isaiah remembered something else too. Something he had never spoken about to anyone outside his own family. When his wife was first admitted, the intake office had lost their insurance paperwork twice. The first time could have been an accident. The second time came with a suggestion from a billing coordinator named Mrs., fielding a tight-lipped woman who looked at Isaiah over her glasses and recommended they try the county clinic 30 miles south instead, as if convenience were the real concern and not the color of the man standing at the desk holding his wife's hand. Isaiah had fought it the way he always fought things, quietly, with documentation, with patience thick enough to choke on, with phone calls made from the hospital parking lot at 6 in the morning before Nyla woke up, not because anger was beneath him, because he had learned early that a black man's anger was never interpreted as justified. It was interpreted as threat. It was interpreted as confirmation. The wing Elise's company had built gave his wife dignity in her final weeks, a room with sunlight, a music room where Nyla could still be a child, a hallway where nurses learned their names and used them. The system that had tried to turn them away did not offer any of those things. The music room, Isaiah said softly. Nyla still talks about it. The lullabies. The blue walls. She said it was the only place in the hospital that didn't smell like goodbye. He paused. She used to ask to go back even after her mother was gone. Elise pressed her lips together. I didn't know, she whispered. Isaiah gave a tired smile that held no bitterness. Most people don't. Nyla came back inside, with snow melting in her hair, and Scout padding behind her. She crossed the kitchen and slipped her hand into Elise's without hesitation, without ceremony, without the careful calculation adults bring to every act of closeness. Isaiah watched it happen. His daughter, who had not held anyone's hand willingly in nearly 2 years, who pulled away from hugs the way some people pull away from fire, stood beside a woman she had known for less than 12 hours and held on as though letting go had simply never occurred to her. Elise looked down at their joined hands. Her breath caught slightly, but she did not pull away. She simply adjusted her grip so the little girl's fingers fit more comfortably against her palm. The way someone instinctively steadies a cup they did not realize they were holding. Something passed across her face, surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of something she did not have a name for yet. Near the bookshelf on the far wall, Nyla tugged Elise toward a row of old photo albums, stacked beside a small cedar box with a tarnished brass latch. The box sat on the second shelf, partially hidden behind a copy of a farming almanac and a framed photograph of Isaiah's wife holding Nyla as a newborn. Elise's free hand brushed the box accidentally. The lid shifted open with a faint creak. Inside, resting on faded blue velvet, sat a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon the color of winter sky. On top lay a single folded note, in delicate handwriting loops and curves, that carried the patience of someone who had known she was writing with borrowed time. Elise pulled her hand back. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Isaiah walked over. He looked at the box for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he lifted the note from the top of the pile. The paper was soft at the edges, folded and unfolded. So many times it carried the shape of memory itself. The creases had become permanent, not from carelessness, but from need. He held it out to Elise. She stared at him. I think maybe, he said quietly, you were supposed to read it. Elise accepted the note as though it might disappear if she held it too tightly. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting curved gently across the page. If you are reading this, then he trusted you enough to hand you something he could never throw away. That alone means more than you know. He will pretend he is fine. He always does. He will carry grief like it is his job. He will choose everyone else first. If Nyla ever laughs again after I am gone, please do not let him run from it. Elise lowered the page. Her eyes shimmered in the morning light. Isaiah faced the stove and added another piece of firewood. The flames climbed slowly. She wrote that 6 months before we lost her, he said. His voice was steady. Practiced the voice of a man who had learned to speak about loss the way others spoke about weather, because falling apart was a luxury he had never been offered. Elise looked back at the cedar box. Beneath the ribbon, half hidden by the stack of letters, sat a second envelope, sealed. Isaiah's name written across the front in the same careful blue ink. It had never been opened. The edges had yellowed slightly with time. She looked at him. You never read this one. Isaiah stared into the fire. The logs shifted with a soft crack. No. Why? His jaw tightened. The muscles along his neck pulled taut. Because I was afraid it might tell me to let go. Elise held the sealed envelope in both hands. She did not open it. She did not offer advice, or platitudes, or the kind of gentle encouragement that people give when they have never lost the person who made the world make sense. She simply walked across the kitchen and held it out to him the way someone extends a hand across a bridge they have already decided to cross. I think she trusted you more than your fear, she said softly. Isaiah looked at the envelope. His fingers trembled slightly when he reached for it, the only visible sign that the man who had carried a stranger through a snowstorm who had raised a daughter alone for 2 years, who had fought insurance offices and billing coordinators and sheriff's calls in a world that constantly asked him to prove he belonged in it, was afraid of a single sheet of paper written by the woman he loved. Nyla slid from her chair and crossed the room. Without being asked, she sat beside her father on the bench near the window without saying a word. She did not ask what was in the envelope. She did not try to hurry him. She simply placed her small hand on his knee and waited with the patience only children who have known grief can carry. Isaiah broke the seal carefully. Inside was one folded page. The handwriting was the same familiar, patient, full of the quiet certainty his wife had carried, even when her body could no longer hold anything else. He unfolded it slowly. The paper smelled faintly of lavender. "If you are reading this, then you waited longer than I expected." Isaiah smiled through wet eyes immediately. "You stubborn man." Nyla grinned. "That sounds like Mom." Isaiah nodded without looking up. "You will carry me longer than you should. You will call it loyalty. Others will call it strength. I will call it what it is, love. But love is not meant to become a locked room, Isaiah. It is not meant to become a monument you visit every day and call it living. It is meant to breathe." Isaiah stopped breathing for a moment, as if the letter had predicted even that. "If Nyla ever finds someone who makes her laugh again, do not be brave. Be open. If someone walks into our home and brings light back through those windows, do not honor me by closing the door. Honor me by opening it." The fire crackled softly. Snow drifted past the windows in slow spirals. Isaiah reached the last line. "And if she happens to be wearing your flannel shirt while doing it, try not to be impossible." Nyla gasped. Elise covered her mouth with both hands. Isaiah stared at the page in complete silence. Then, for the first time since his wife passed, he laughed and cried at the same time. Quietly, honestly, the sound filled the cabin like something that had been locked away too long and finally found the door. Nyla wrapped both arms around him and pressed her face against his shoulder. Elise looked away toward the window, giving him dignity, even inside grief, because some moments are too sacred to watch directly. They can only be witnessed from the corner of your eye, the way you look at the sun knowing it is there, feeling its warmth, but understanding that some light is not meant to be stared at. After a long moment, Isaiah folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. His eyes found Elise across the room. Neither spoke, neither needed to. The cabin held them both in silence, and for the first time in 2 years, silence did not feel like absence. The phone on the table buzzed twice and then began ringing. Elise glanced at the screen. The name read, Ruth Nakamura. She stepped toward the hallway before answering, her voice dropping into a register Isaiah had not heard before, clipped, professional, the kind of language that belonged to conference rooms and not mountain cabins. When Elise returned, her face had changed. The softness was still there, buried beneath something harder, something practiced, like armor she had taken off and was now being asked to put back on. "Graham announced to the press that the engagement remains active," she said. The words came out flat, as if she were reading a headline about someone else's life. Isaiah frowned. "Engagement?" Elise closed her eyes for 1 second. "His name is Graham Prescott. Old money, old expectations. His family and mine have been connected since before either of us had a say in it. Same schools, same charity galas, same photographs in the same society pages." She sat down across from Isaiah. Yesterday was supposed to be the announcement. Investors, press, cameras, perfect smiles. Her voice carried no pride, only exhaustion. "I left before I walked onto the stage." Isaiah studied her face. "Why?" Elise looked toward the window where the dark SUV still sat near the gate. "Because everyone loved what I built," she said quietly. "Nobody asked if I was happy inside it." She paused. Sometimes people with everything still need somewhere to breathe. Before Isaiah could respond, a knock came at the front door. Sharp, deliberate. The knock of someone who expected the door to open because doors had always opened for him. Isaiah walked toward it. When he pulled it open, 3 people stood on the porch. A woman in her 40s wearing a dark coat and carrying a leather folder, Ruth Nakamura, he assumed. Beside her, a man in a security jacket with an earpiece, and behind them both, tall and immaculate, in a charcoal overcoat, with snow dusting his shoulders like he had been placed there by a stylist, stood a man whose presence filled the doorway before he even spoke. Graham Prescott looked past Isaiah as if he were part of the architecture. His eyes swept the room without pausing on anything, not the photographs on the wall, not the firewood stacked beside the stove, not the small pair of boots drying near the door that belonged to a child. He found Elise standing near the kitchen table, still wearing the flannel shirt. His expression shifted, not shock exactly, but something closer to contempt wrapped carefully in concern, the way expensive paper wraps a bill. "Elise," he said. His voice was smooth and controlled, the voice of a man accustomed to rooms that rearrange themselves when he entered. "You can't be serious." His eyes moved slowly across the room, cataloging, appraising, dismissing the worn pine floors that creaked with every step, the wood stove with its cast iron door and the faint smell of ash, the mismatched chairs around a table that had never seated anyone important by the world's standards, the drawings taped to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like animals. Then his gaze settled on Isaiah, who stood beside his own front door in his own home with his arms folded across his chest. Graham did not greet him, did not extend his hand, did not acknowledge him as the homeowner or the man who had saved the life of the woman he claimed to love 12 hours earlier. He simply looked through him the way certain people look through anyone who does not match the picture they expect to see. "This is where you've been," Graham said to Elise, his voice dropping half a register. In this situation, Isaiah said nothing. He remained where he stood, steady, unmoved, his expression carrying the particular stillness of a man who had spent a lifetime being underestimated by men who mistook their own comfort for authority. Graham turned back to Elise. "The board is waiting. The press is waiting. Your father's legacy is waiting." His tone carried ownership, not affection, possession, not love, the voice of someone who had been taught that people were assets and relationships were mergers. He stepped forward and reached for her arm. Isaiah's voice came from behind him, level and unhurried, carrying no anger and no apology. "She hasn't asked you to touch her." Graham froze mid-step. He turned slowly, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing toward Isaiah, with the kind of focused displeasure that revealed exactly what he saw when he looked at the man standing in front of him. Not a homeowner, not a father, not a former structural engineer who had designed bridges strong enough to hold the weight of 1,000 cars, but an obstacle in a room where he did not believe obstacles had the right to exist. "I don't believe this concerns you," Graham said. The words came wrapped in courtesy but carried the temperature of contempt. Isaiah's voice did not rise, did not waver. "You're in my house." The 3 words landed with quiet authority. They did not need volume. They needed only truth. Graham's jaw tightened. He shifted his approach, turning back to Elise with a softer mask, the concerned partner, the reasonable man, the voice of logic in an illogical situation. "Elise, I understand you needed a break. We all need space sometimes, but this doesn't look right." He glanced briefly at Isaiah again, then at the cabin walls, then back at Elise. The optics alone, optics. Elise repeated the word, as if tasting something she had swallowed too many times. That's all it ever was, wasn't it? Optics. Image. The right photograph at the right table. She stepped forward, and for the first time, Isaiah saw the woman behind the flannel shirt, not the one who made pancakes and held his daughter's hand, but the one who had built a company from her father's name and her own spine. "I saw what you did to the Linden Heights proposal, Graham." The room went still. Graham's composure flickered like a light touched by wind. "You killed it through a shell company," Elise continued. 14 months of community planning, 200 families waiting for affordable housing, public meetings, town council votes, all of it buried because the neighborhood didn't align with brand identity. Her voice was steady now, harder than Isaiah had heard it all morning. Harder perhaps than she had allowed it to be in years. 80% of that neighborhood was black. You knew that. You just made sure nobody said it out loud. Graham's expression hardened into something cold and polished. "That was a business decision. It was a choice," Elise said, "and I watched you make it from across a conference table while you smiled at me like it was nothing." She looked at Isaiah, then toward the hallway, then back at Graham. "Get out of this house." Graham stared at her for 3 full seconds. Ruth Nakamura stepped forward and held the front door open without a word. Graham Prescott walked out into the snow. He did not look back. He did not apologize. He simply left the way men like him always left, as though the room had failed to meet his standards, rather than the other way around. The door closed gently behind him. Through the window, Isaiah watched the man cross the yard toward the waiting SUV, his expensive shoes leaving dark prints in the white snow that the wind was already beginning to fill. The cabin became quiet again. Not the strained silence of confrontation, but something softer, the kind of quiet that follows a storm when the air finally stops shaking. Elise stood near the window with her hands pressed flat against the table. Her shoulders rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. Ruth remained on the porch. Through the glass, the dark SUV reversed slowly down the gravel path and disappeared beyond the tree line. Elise picked up her phone. Ruth. The woman appeared in the doorway immediately, folder still in hand. "Tell the board I need one more day." Ruth hesitated. "Miss Harrington, the press conference is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The quarterly projections are already circulating, and then delay them." Elise gave a faint smile, the first one that had reached her eyes since she had spoken Graham's name. For the first time in 10 years, "I am not interested in a schedule." Ruth studied her for a long moment, not with judgment, but with the careful recognition of someone watching a person they had worked beside for years finally say something they had been thinking for longer. Then she nodded once. Understood. The door closed gently. No drama, no argument, just silence and the sound of footsteps fading down the porch steps. Elise looked down at the phone in her hand. 31 missed calls from Graham, 14 from numbers. She did not recognize press, she assumed. She stared at the screen for several seconds. Then she pressed the power button and held it until the screen went dark. The cabin became impossibly quiet. Nyla appeared from the hallway with her coloring books and a box of crayons. She looked at Elise, then at the dark phone, and smiled, as if she had just witnessed magic. "You turned it off," she said with undisguised wonder. Elise laughed softly through tears. She did not try to hide. That felt terrifying. Isaiah leaned against the counter. Good things usually do. Afternoon light drifted through the kitchen windows, stretching gold across the pine floor and warming the faded photographs on the shelf. The snow outside had eased to soft glitter beneath a pale winter sun. The world beyond the glass looked impossibly still, as if it were holding its breath on purpose. Nyla sat at the table and spread her crayons out with the seriousness of someone preparing for important work. "Lunch pancakes," she announced. "Important meeting." Elise looked down at her. "More important than a board meeting?" Nyla nodded with complete conviction. "Way more." Isaiah turned back toward the stove. He reached for the batter bowl on the counter. Elise moved beside him without thinking. Her hand reached for the bowl at the same time. Their fingers brushed against the rim. Both paused. Neither pulled away immediately. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, warmer, as though the walls had drawn closer to hold something fragile that neither of them was ready to name. Through the far window, a helicopter sat on the valley landing strip beyond the trees, distant and patient, its rotor still, waiting to carry Elise back to the world that knew her name and her net worth, but had never once asked what she wanted for breakfast. But when she looked back into the cabin, Isaiah, stirring batter with quiet concentration, Nyla humming a song she had not hummed in 2 years, Scout asleep by the fire, and the old flannel shirt still wrapped around her shoulders, leaving felt harder than staying. For the first time in her life, the world outside the window seemed smaller than the room she was standing in. Late afternoon settled softly over Pinecrest. The snow had stopped, and sunlight rested across the white fields like gold brushed over quiet places. Inside the cabin, the last pancakes sat untouched on the table, because nobody seemed ready for the moment that was coming. Nyla sat on the kitchen floor with Scout's head in her lap, working with paper and scissors, and the kind of patience that only children who have spent time in hospital waiting rooms ever learn. When she finished, she stood, and walked to Elise. She held out a paper snowflake, delicate, uneven, beautiful in the way only handmade things can be. "Mom taught me how to make these," she said softly. "In the hospital, when we couldn't go outside." Elise knelt down. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You can take it," Nyla whispered. "So you don't forget the cabin." Elise accepted it with both hands. Her eyes shimmered, but did not spill. She held the snowflake the way she had held the letter, as if it were worth more than anything paper had a right to be. Isaiah walked Elise toward the front porch. The valley stretched out below them in white and silver. She spoke quietly. "I didn't stay because I felt sorry for you." Isaiah waited. "I stayed because your daughter laughed, and because when I sat at your table this morning, for the first time in years, I wanted to belong somewhere." Isaiah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small iron key, the spare cabin key, worn smooth from years in the same drawer. He placed it on the porch railing between them. Pinecrest isn't much, but the doors never locked. Elise looked at the key, then at him. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Nyla appeared in the doorway. She wrapped her arms around Elise's waist and pressed her face against the flannel shirt. The paper snowflake crinkled softly between them. Isaiah looked away toward the tree line because some moments deserve privacy, even when they are happening right beside you. He stood there with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the mountains, and he let the moment belong entirely to them. Elise stepped back. She slipped off the flannel shirt and folded it carefully. Then she stopped, looked at it, drew this a little longer. Isaiah almost laughed. "Fair trade." He glanced at the paper snowflake in her hand. "For that." Elise smiled through tears. She walked toward the waiting car at the gate. At the gate, she paused. She turned back toward the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney. Scout sat on the porch. Nyla waved with both hands. And Isaiah stood in the doorway of a home built from loss and grace. Elise lifted the iron key from her coat pocket. She held it against the paper snowflake. Two things that cost nothing, two things worth more than everything, waiting beyond the trees. The car pulled away slowly. Inside the cabin, Nyla pressed her nose against the cold glass. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart, she's coming back." Isaiah looked at the empty chair where a stranger had sat and changed the sound of his home in less than a day. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think she is." Outside, winter light covered the valley. Inside, silence fell across the room. Not empty silence, not grief, the kind that arrives when someone opens a door they were afraid to walk through and finds the other person already standing on the other side.